The scar tissue stretched across Rachel Winter's face like a roadmap of her suffering, a stark reminder of the fire that had claimed her family home and left her forever marked. She sat alone on the dusty bench outside Cottonwood Springs, only general store, the late evening sun casting long shadows that mercifully obscured her disfigurement from the curious stares of passersby. Too damaged for any decent man to want, the whispers followed her like persistent flies. But what none of them knew was that deep in Blackwater Canyon, a solitary rancher with his own invisible scars would soon challenge everything this broken woman believed about herself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The frontier town of Cottonwood Springs, Colorado, 1885, had little patience for broken things or broken people. Rachel adjusted the wide-brimmed hat that shielded her face from both the harsh summer sun and harsher judgment. 6 months had passed since she'd awakened in Doc Wilson's back room, skin seared and family gone, with nothing but the charred remains of her former life and the pitying glances of townsfolk who'd once called her the prettiest girl in 3 counties. "Miss Winters." The deep voice startled her from her thoughts. "Your supplies are ready." Rachel kept her scarred side turned away as she approached Mr. Peterson, the shopkeeper. His eyes, like everyone's, darted to her damaged face, before quickly finding something intensely interesting about his ledger book. "That'll be $2.40, he mumbled, still not looking at her directly. Rachel counted out the coins carefully. The money from selling what remained of her family's property was dwindling faster than she'd anticipated. The teaching position at the schoolhouse, her last hope for independence, had mysteriously been filled the day after the school board got a good look at her face. "Can't have the children frightened," the chairman had explained with manufactured regret. "I heard the Henderson place is hiring a housekeeper," Mr. Peterson offered, his voice carrying that particular blend of pity and discomfort Rachel had grown accustomed to. "Mrs. Henderson's expecting again, needs the help." "Thank you," Rachel replied softly, though the mere thought of working for the woman who had once been her closest friend made her stomach twist. Clara Henderson hadn't visited once since the fire. Few had. "You'll need to go soon if you want to catch them before dark," he added, pushing her supplies across the counter. Rachel nodded, gathering her parcels with practiced efficiency. Her small rented room at the back of Widow Parker's house awaited her, a cramped space with a narrow bed and a cracked mirror she'd covered with a shawl her first night there. Not home, never home, but shelter nonetheless. The road to the Henderson farm stretched before her like an accusation. Each step stirred dust that clung to the hem of her plain brown dress, once her mother's Sunday best, now her everyday wear. Rachel's throat tightened as memories of Clara surfaced. Girlhood confidences exchanged, dreams shared over lemonade on front porches. Clara's delighted face when she'd announced her engagement to Thomas Henderson 3 years ago. Rachel Winters, as I live and breathe. The voice belonged to Abigail Wright, the town's self-appointed gossip keeper, who emerged from the milliner's shop with her daughter in tow. The girl, barely 16, gasped audibly when Rachel turned, then quickly averted her eyes. "Mrs. Wright," Rachel acknowledged with a slight nod, instinctively adjusting her hat to better shadow her face. "We've been wondering what's become of you, keeping to yourself so. Are you well?" The question contained no genuine concern, only hunger for new details to share over afternoon teas. "As well as can be expected," Rachel answered, the familiar script of these interactions exhausting her already limited reserves. "Such a tragedy," Abigail clicked her tongue, eyes gleaming with morbid fascination. "And you, all alone now, have you considered returning east to your mother's people? Surely they would take you in." The reminder of relatives who had responded to her desperate letters with polite regrets stung afresh. "I have no people left, Mrs. Wright." "Well," Abigail straightened, disappointment evident at Rachel's refusal to provide more fodder for conversation. "Some burdens we must bear with Christian fortitude. God gives us only what we can handle." Rachel's hands tightened on her packages. If that were true, God had severely misjudged her capacity. "Come along, Elizabeth," Abigail directed her daughter, who had been staring at Rachel's scars with undisguised horror. "We mustn't be late for dinner." Rachel watched them go, the girl whispering urgently to her mother, no doubt asking questions about the monster they'd encountered. Drawing a steadying breath, Rachel continued toward the Henderson farm, each step heavier than the last. The farmhouse appeared as the sun began its final descent. Whitewashed walls glowing amber in the fading light, smoke curling invitingly from the chimney. Rachel paused at the gate, remembering happier times, summer socials and harvest dances when Thomas Henderson had courted Clara beneath these very oak trees, while Rachel had entertained dreams of her own suitor someday. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Before she could gather her courage to approach, the front door swung open. Thomas Henderson stood framed in the doorway, his expression shifting from curiosity to recognition to discomfort in rapid succession. "Rachel," he called, not moving from the porch. "Clara mentioned you might be stopping by, so Clara had been warned of her coming." Rachel squared her shoulders and approached, careful to keep her profile turned. "Mr. Henderson, I heard you might be in need of household help." Thomas nodded, his eyes fixed somewhere above her left shoulder. "We are, with Clara's condition and all." But we've just hired someone else," came Clara's voice as she appeared beside her husband, her belly already showing the rounded evidence of their third child. Her eyes, unlike her husband's, met Rachel's directly, though they lingered on her scars with poorly concealed revulsion. "Mabel Johnson's girls started yesterday. I would have sent word, but no one wanted to seek out the scarred woman's company willingly. The unspoken truth hung between them." "I understand," Rachel said quietly, though understanding didn't lessen the sting of rejection or the panic rising at the prospect of another closed door. Clara's expression softened fractionally. "How are you managing, Rachel? Truly?" The unexpected kindness threatened to unravel Rachel's carefully maintained composure. "I manage. It's getting dark," Thomas interjected, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of conversation. "You shouldn't be walking back to town alone." "I've grown accustomed to my own company," Rachel replied, a hint of bitterness escaping despite her best efforts. Clara disappeared briefly into the house, returning with a small bundle. "Some bread and preserves. We just put up strawberry last week." She held it out like a peace offering. Rachel accepted the charity, the humiliation of it burning hotter than the memory of flames. "Thank you." "Rachel," Clara hesitated, lowering her voice though Thomas had retreated inside. "Have you considered, that is, there's a place in Denver, for women who need special care." The words struck like physical blows. "An asylum." Clara was suggesting an asylum. "I'm scarred, Clara. Not mad," Rachel whispered, tears threatening. Clara looked genuinely distressed. "I only meant—" "I know what you meant." Rachel stepped back, dignity the only possession she had left to cling to. "Good evening to you both." She turned away, the bundle clutched to her chest, tears finally spilling as she hurried down the darkening road. She'd barely reached the bend when hoofbeats approached from behind, too fast for comfort. Rachel moved to the side, her heart racing with sudden fear. "Miss," a deep voice called. "Miss, hold up!" A rider appeared, slowing his horse to match her pace. In the dimming light, Rachel could make out broad shoulders, a dark hat pulled low, and a face weathered by sun and wind. "You shouldn't be out here alone," the stranger said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "These roads aren't safe after dark." Rachel kept walking, face averted. "I'm nearly to town." "Town's 4 miles yet," he countered, "and you're headed the wrong direction." Rachel stopped, momentarily disoriented. In her distress, she'd taken the fork that led deeper into the valley instead of back toward Cottonwood Springs. "This road leads to Blackwater Canyon," the man explained, dismounting with fluid grace despite his size. "Nothing out there but my ranch and a whole lot of trouble for a woman alone." Rachel finally looked at him directly, bracing for the inevitable reaction to her appearance. The stranger's eyes widened briefly, but to her surprise his gaze remained steady, assessing, but not recoiling. "You're Rachel Winters," he said. Not a question. Her spine stiffened. "And you have the advantage of me, sir." "Caleb Blackwood. My ranch is at the end of this road." He gestured toward the deepening shadows of the canyon. "I've heard about you in town." Of course he had. Everyone had. "Well, Mr. Blackwood, now you've seen for yourself the fire-touched woman in the flesh." Rachel's voice cracked despite her attempt at defiance. "I'll find my way back to town." Caleb Blackwood studied her with an intensity that made Rachel want to hide and stand taller simultaneously. "It'll be full dark soon. My foreman's wife could use help with meals and such at the ranch. Temporary, but it pays fair." Rachel blinked, certain she'd misheard. "You're offering me work?" "I'm offering anyone who's lost their way a chance to find it again," he said simply. "Your face doesn't concern me, Miss Winters." "Can you cook?" "Yes," she whispered, memories of her mother's kitchen surfacing unbidden. "Then climb up," he said, extending a calloused hand toward her. "You can start tonight. Try it for a week. If you hate it, I'll bring you back to town myself." Rachel hesitated, the strange man's offer hanging between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Every instinct honed by months of rejection warned against hope. "Why would you help me?" she asked, suspicion warring with desperate need. Something shifted in Caleb Blackwood's expression, a shadow of understanding so profound it momentarily took Rachel's breath away. "Because 18 years ago, I was the one walking the wrong road after dark," he said quietly. "Someone gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one. I'm just passing it along." Their eyes held, and in that moment, Rachel sensed that this man knew something about scars that had nothing to do with fire or flesh. "1 week," she agreed finally, accepting his outstretched hand. His grip was warm and steady as he helped her onto his horse, mounting behind her with surprising gentleness for such a large man. As they rode toward Blackwater Canyon, the fading light at their backs and unknown darkness ahead, Rachel felt something stir within her chest. Not hope exactly, but perhaps its quieter, more cautious cousin. What she couldn't know, as the rhythmic hoofbeats carried them deeper into the canyon, was how this chance encounter would unravel everything she believed about her future, about her scars, and about the possibility of finding home in the most unexpected of places. The Blackwater Ranch materialized from the darkness like a mirage, a sprawling main house flanked by a bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings. Lanterns glowed in windows, casting golden rectangles onto the hard-packed earth of the yard. As Caleb guided his horse toward the hitching post, Rachel felt the weight of unseen eyes upon them. "That's Joseph," Caleb said, nodding toward a tall figure emerging from the barn. "My foreman." Rachel instinctively turned her scarred side away as the man approached, hat in hand. "Boss," Joseph acknowledged, his curiosity evident though he maintained a respectful distance. "Everything all right in town?" "Fine," Caleb replied, dismounting before reaching up to help Rachel. His hands at her waist were impersonal, but careful as he set her on the ground. "This is Miss Winters. She'll be helping Hannah with the cooking for a spell. Miss Winters, Joseph Miller." Joseph's eyes flickered to her face, then away with practiced politeness. "Ma'am, Hannah will be pleased for the help. She's been running herself ragged with the crew doubled for spring roundup." Before Rachel could respond, the front door of the main house swung open, spilling more light into the yard. A small woman with copper-colored hair pulled into a practical bun stood silhouetted in the doorway. "Joseph Miller, if you don't get yourself to supper this instant." The woman stopped abruptly, noticing Rachel. "Oh, I didn't realize we had company." "Not company," Caleb corrected, his deep voice matter-of-fact. "Help. Miss Winters will be assisting you in the kitchen, Hannah. She'll need a place to stay." Hannah Miller's eyes widened slightly as she took in Rachel's appearance, but her smile remained warm. "Well, praise the Lord. These men eat like locusts. And I've been telling Joseph for weeks I can't manage alone with the baby coming. She patted her stomach, which showed just the slightest curve beneath her apron. I don't want to impose, Rachel began, overwhelmed by the swift turn of events. Nonsense, Hannah declared, stepping forward to take Rachel's arm with easy familiarity. The small room off the kitchen is all made up. Previous cook used it before he ran off with a saloon girl from Silverton. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. Between us, his biscuits were like rocks anyway. You can't possibly be worse. The simple kindness, treating her as a person rather than a curiosity or a tragedy, nearly undid Rachel completely. She blinked rapidly to dispel the threatening tears. Come along then, Hannah continued, guiding her toward the house. You must be starved, and there's plenty left from supper. Rachel glanced back at Caleb, who stood watching them, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. He nodded once, a man of few words apparently satisfied that the matter was settled. Dawn comes early, Miss Winters. Rest well. That night, in the small but clean room with its narrow bed and cheerful quilt, Rachel lay awake long after the sounds of the ranch had quieted. Through the thin wall, she could hear Hannah and Joseph's murmured conversation, their easy laughter a reminder of connections she'd believed forever lost to her. For the first time since the fire, she slept without dreams of flames. Morning arrived with a chorus of roosters and the clatter of activity as ranch hands prepared for the day's work. Rachel dressed quickly in her plain brown dress, the only one she owned besides the black one for Sundays, and ventured into the kitchen to find Hannah already elbow-deep in dough. There you are, Hannah greeted cheerfully. I was about to wake you. These men start hollering for breakfast at the crack of dawn. I'm sorry I overslept, Rachel began, but Hannah waved away her apology. Nonsense, you're right on time. Coffee's brewing, bacon needs turning, and these biscuits won't cut themselves. Can you manage? For the next hour, Rachel worked alongside Hannah in a dance that grew increasingly synchronized as they prepared breakfast for 12 hungry ranch hands, Joseph and Caleb himself. The familiar routines of cooking grounded Rachel, memories of her mother's lessons guiding her hands as she cut perfect rounds from Hannah's biscuit dough and turned bacon to crisp perfection. You've done this before, Hannah observed approvingly. My mother taught me, Rachel answered, the words coming easier than expected. Before the fire. Hannah's hands stilled momentarily over the stove. I heard about what happened. Terrible business. Unlike others, she didn't avoid looking at Rachel's scars or fill the air with platitudes. Instead, she simply added, must have been unspeakably painful, both the burns and the loss. The simple acknowledgement of both her physical and emotional pain loosened something in Rachel's chest. Yes, she whispered. It was. Hannah nodded, then handed her a platter of eggs. Life has a way of burning us all, one way or another. Some scars just show more than others. She glanced meaningfully toward the dining room where the men would soon gather. You'll find no shortage of them here. Before Rachel could ask what she meant, the kitchen door swung open and men began filing in, their voices loud after the pre-dawn quiet, their appetites evident in appreciative glances toward the laden table. Rachel instinctively retreated to the shadowed corner of the kitchen, years of conditioning making her want to hide her damaged face. Miss Winters. Caleb Blackwood's voice cut through the commotion as he entered last, ducking his head slightly to clear the doorframe. In daylight, she could see him properly for the first time, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. His face was weathered, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he'd once smiled more frequently than he did now. But it was the scar that captured her attention, a jagged line that ran from his left temple to the corner of his mouth, puckering the skin in a way that gave his face a permanently stern expression on one side. Rachel realized she was staring and quickly averted her eyes. Mr. Blackwood, I see you've survived your first morning with Hannah, he said, his tone neutral but not unkind. The men are saying these are the best biscuits they've had since crossing the Mississippi. Miss Winters has a gift, Hannah declared, placing the final platter on the table. Now sit, all of you, before it gets cold. To Rachel's surprise, Caleb pulled out a chair at the main table. You'll join us, Miss Winters. It wasn't a question, and Rachel found herself seated before she could protest, painfully aware of the curious glances from the ranch hands. To their credit, after initial looks of surprise, most focused on their food with the single-minded dedication of men who worked from sunup to sundown. Miss Winters will be helping Hannah with the cooking and household matters, Caleb announced between bites. I expect you all to show her the same respect you show Mrs. Miller. A chorus of, "Yes, boss," and nodding heads followed this pronouncement. Ain't right for womenfolk to be alone these days, one older hand commented, his weathered face kind beneath a shock of white hair. Too many unsavory types about. That why you're still single, Pete? Another joked, earning scattered laughter. I'm unsavory by choice, Matthews, Pete retorted good-naturedly. But I ain't dangerous. Rachel kept her head down, focusing on her plate, waiting for the inevitable comments about her appearance. They never came. Instead, conversation flowed around her, talk of cattle, weather, and the upcoming roundup, as if her presence at the table was the most natural thing in the world. The eastern pasture needs clearing before we move the herd, Joseph was saying to Caleb. That rock slide last month left a mess. Take 4 men today, Caleb replied. I'll join you after I check the south boundary. There were tracks yesterday that concerned me. Rustlers? Joseph's voice lowered. Or worse. Caleb's expression darkened. The Benton gang has been spotted in these parts again. A tense silence fell over the table. Rachel glanced up to find Hannah's face had paled. Miss Winters. Caleb's voice cut through the sudden tension. After breakfast, I'd like to show you around the property so you know your way. Rachel nodded, surprised at the personal attention from the ranch owner. Of course. As the men finished and filed out to begin their day's work, offering polite nods to Rachel and Hannah, Caleb remained at the table, nursing a final cup of coffee. Hannah busied herself clearing dishes, shooting meaningful glances at Rachel that she couldn't interpret. Hannah, Caleb said finally, I believe Joseph was looking for you earlier. Something about names for the baby. Hannah's eyebrows rose, but she wiped her hands on her apron with a knowing smile. Well, I wouldn't want to keep him waiting on something so important. Miss Winters, I'll finish these when I return. Left alone with Caleb, Rachel felt a flutter of nervousness. She rose to continue clearing the table, but his voice stopped her. Sit a moment, Miss Winters, she complied, folding her hands in her lap to hide their slight trembling. Do you know why I brought you here? He asked directly. Rachel swallowed. You said your foreman's wife needed help. She does, he acknowledged. But there are women in town who need work just as badly and don't carry your particular burden. The blunt reference to her scars made Rachel flinch. If you've reconsidered, I haven't, he interrupted. I'm merely establishing that we both understand this arrangement goes beyond simple employment. Rachel's spine stiffened. I'm not sure I take your meaning, Mr. Blackwood. His eyes, a deep blue she hadn't noticed in the darkness, held hers steadily. I've watched this town destroy people, Miss Winters. Good people. People who didn't fit into neat, comfortable boxes. He leaned forward slightly, his intensity magnetic. Cottonwood Springs whispers. It judges. It decides who belongs and who doesn't. And once it decides you don't belong, it will whittle away at your spirit until there's nothing left. Rachel's breath caught. You speak as if from experience. Something flickered in his expression. When I first came to this valley, I was younger than you are now, carrying different scars but wearing them just as visibly. The town made its judgment. I chose not to accept it. And now you own half the valley, Rachel observed, pieces falling into place. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. A quarter, at most. But yes, I built something here despite their predictions of my failure or demise. He paused, studying her. I saw the same look in your eyes last night that I used to see in my mirror. The look of someone one push away from surrender. The accuracy of his assessment burned. I was not. You were walking alone on a dangerous road at nightfall, headed the wrong direction, after being turned away from the last place that might have offered you work. He stated flatly, "If that's not surrender beginning, I don't know what is." Anger flared, hot and unexpected after months of numbness. "You know nothing about me." "I know enough," he countered, unperturbed by her flash of temper. "I know you survived when others would have broken. I know you faced cruelty with dignity. And I know you deserve better than to disappear into an asylum or fade away in that miserable room at the widow's house." The mention of the asylum startled her. "How did you—" "Clara Henderson talks freely at church socials," he explained, a hint of distaste evident. "Her husband sells me cattle." Humiliation washed over Rachel anew. "So this is charity." "This," Caleb said firmly, "is opportunity. What you make of it is entirely your choice. Hannah needs help. I need a cook who won't poison my men. You need purpose and a safe place to heal. It's an equal exchange." The simplicity of his framing disarmed her. "And if I fail? If I cannot adjust to this life?" Caleb rose, his height imposing, even as his manner remained matter-of-fact. "Then I'll take you wherever you wish to go, with wages in your pocket and references for your next position. I'm offering a door, Miss Winters, not a cage." Rachel studied him, this scarred man who spoke of opportunity and choice when the rest of the world saw only limitations for women like her. "Why does it matter to you what becomes of me?" For the first time, Caleb seemed to consider his words carefully. 18 years ago, I stood at a crossroads, much like yours. Someone showed me kindness when I least deserved it, and most needed it. That kindness saved my life." His eyes held hers. "Perhaps I'm merely passing on a debt." Before she could respond, he continued, "I'll show you the property now. The canyon can be disorienting for newcomers, and I won't have you getting lost." The tour revealed Blackwater Ranch to be larger and more prosperous than Rachel had initially realized. Beyond the main house and bunkhouse lay well-maintained corrals, a blacksmith's forge, storage buildings, and pastures that stretched toward distant mountains. Caleb explained each area's purpose with efficient precision, introducing her to workers they encountered with simple directness. "Miss Winters will be staying on, quote," was all he said, but the words carried a weight of finality that precluded questions. As they approached a small creek that marked the eastern boundary of the immediate property, Rachel gathered her courage to ask the question that had been forming since breakfast. "Who are the Benton gang? I noticed how everyone reacted when you mentioned them." Caleb's expression hardened. "Outlaws. Started as cattle rustlers, graduated to robbery and worse. Their leader, Frank Benton, has a particular hatred for this ranch and its owner." "You," Rachel clarified. He nodded grimly. "We have history." He glanced at her, seeming to debate how much to share. "Frank Benton was the son of the man who owned this land before me. He expected to inherit it, but his father lost it in a poker game to the man who later sold it to me." "And he blames you," Rachel guessed. "He blames everyone except himself for his misfortunes," Caleb corrected. "I'm merely a convenient target. He's been in and out of territorial prison for years, but recent reports put him back in these parts." Rachel processed this information, understanding now the tension at breakfast. "Is that why you wanted to show me the property? So I'd understand the danger?" Caleb stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "Life here isn't without risk, Miss Winters. I wanted you to make an informed choice about staying." The consideration behind this gesture, allowing her agency when the rest of the world seemed determined to deny it, touched something deep within Rachel. "I appreciate your honesty," she said quietly, "and your concern. But I've already faced the worst life could throw at me and survived. I'm not afraid of outlaws." Something like respect flickered in Caleb's eyes. "Perhaps you'll fit in here better than I anticipated." As they turned back toward the main house, Rachel noticed a small cabin set apart from the other buildings, nestled against the canyon wall. Unlike the other structures, it showed no signs of activity. "What's that building?" she asked. Caleb's gaze followed hers, his expression shuddering slightly. That was my home before I built the main house. It's not in use now." Something in his tone discouraged further questions, and Rachel didn't press. But as they walked back, she found herself glancing over her shoulder at the solitary cabin, wondering what memories it held for the enigmatic rancher who had offered her refuge when the rest of the world had turned away. Back at the main house, Hannah welcomed her with flour-dusted hands and a list of tasks long enough to keep Rachel's mind and hands occupied for the remainder of the day. By evening, as she helped serve the hungry crew their supper, Rachel realized with surprise that hours had passed without her once thinking of her scars or the pitying glances they usually attracted. Instead, she'd been too busy learning the rhythm of ranch life, the specific way Hannah needed bread, the precise amount of coffee required for 12 men plus the boss, the names of ranch hands who had begun to differentiate themselves through small kindnesses or distinctive habits. After the men had eaten and the kitchen was finally quiet, Rachel sank into a chair, exhaustion settling into her bones. Not the defeated weariness she'd grown accustomed to, but the honest fatigue of meaningful work. "You did well today," Hannah said, placing a cup of tea before her. "The men were singing your praises, especially about those apple dumplings." Rachel smiled faintly. "My mother's recipe." Hannah settled across from her, her own cup steaming. "Tell me about her, if you don't mind." The invitation to speak of her loss without awkwardness or pity was so unexpected that Rachel found words pouring out, stories of her mother's kitchen wisdom, her father's quiet strength, the small farmhouse that had been her world until flames claimed it all. Hannah listened without interruption, offering neither platitudes nor judgment, simply bearing witness to Rachel's grief. "They sound like fine people who raised a fine daughter," Hannah said when Rachel finally fell silent. "They'd be proud of your strength." "I don't feel strong," Rachel admitted. "Most days I feel like I'm one misstep from shattering completely." Hannah's eyes held understanding beyond her years. "That's the secret no one tells you about strength, Rachel. It doesn't mean not breaking. It means continuing even when you're broken." The simple truth of this observation resonated deeply. Rachel's throat tightened with emotion. "Why is everyone here so accepting?" she asked finally. "In town, people can barely look at me without flinching." Hannah considered this, absently rubbing her slightly rounded belly. Blackwater Ranch has always been a refuge for the broken and discarded. Caleb doesn't hire men for their past or their appearance, only for their willingness to work hard and deal honestly. She glanced toward the door that led to the ranch yard, lowering her voice slightly. "Most of these men have stories they don't share, pasts they're running from, or wounds they're healing. My Joseph lost his arm in the war before Caleb found him drunk in a Denver alley and offered him work when no one else would." Rachel's eyes widened. She hadn't noticed Joseph's missing limb, so capably did he manage his duties. "And Caleb himself?" she ventured, curiosity overcoming propriety. Hannah's expression grew careful. "His story is his own to tell or keep. But I will say this. There's a reason he recognizes suffering in others so clearly." She rose, gathering their empty cups. "Get some rest, Rachel. Tomorrow comes early, and word is the cattle buyer from Denver arrives with it." That night, as Rachel lay in her small bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling into darkness, she found herself contemplating the strange turn her life had taken. Just 24 hours earlier, she had been walking the wrong road in gathering darkness, hope extinguished, future empty. Now she lay beneath a clean quilt in a room of her own, her hands tired from useful work, her mind filled with new faces and names that carried no pity or revulsion. And at the center of this unexpected reprieve stood Caleb Blackwood, scarred, stern, and somehow seeing in her what others could not. Not a ruined woman, not a pitiable creature, but someone worth offering a chance. Sleep claimed her before she could untangle her feelings about this realization, but for the first time since the fire, her dreams held neither flames nor terror, only the image of a solitary cabin waiting in shadow, and beyond it, mountains touched with the first light of dawn. The following weeks at Blackwater Ranch unfolded with surprising ease as Rachel found herself settling into rhythms both familiar and strange. Each morning began before dawn, preparing hearty breakfasts alongside Hannah, whose pregnancy was becoming more pronounced as spring deepened into summer. The men filed in with sleepy greetings that grew warmer and less cautious as days passed, until Rachel found herself responding to good-natured teasing about her apple pies with quips of her own. "You've put some meat on those bones," Hannah observed one afternoon as they kneaded bread side by side, "and color in your cheeks that has nothing to do with the kitchen heat." Rachel paused, realizing with surprise that her dresses had indeed grown less loose around the waist, her constant exhaustion giving way to a steady energy that carried her through long days. "I suppose I have." "It suits you," Hannah said simply, before launching into a spirited debate about the merits of sugar versus honey in cornbread that left no room for self-consciousness. These small moments of normalcy accumulated like raindrops filling a parched basin. The elderly ranch hand, Pete, teaching her to identify bird calls during his noon breaks. Joseph's patient explanations of ranch operations when she delivered lunch to the men in distant pastures. Hannah's comfortable chatter about everything from remedies for chilblains to town gossip she'd gleaned from the supply wagon driver. But it was Caleb Blackwood who remained the ranch's enigmatic center, present but somehow apart, watching over his domain with quiet intensity. He took his meals with the men, contributed to discussions of cattle prices and breeding stock, and rode out each day to oversee some aspect of the vast property. Yet Rachel sensed a solitude about him that persisted despite the bustling life of the ranch. She learned to anticipate his preferences. Coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, biscuits with honey rather than jam, steak rare when available. Small details that Hannah confirmed with approving nods when Rachel implemented them without being told. "You're observant," Hannah remarked once, after Rachel had set aside the last portion of blackberry cobbler knowing it was Caleb's favorite, though he'd never said as much. "He notices, you know, even if he doesn't say it." Rachel had brushed off the comment, unwilling to examine why the rancher's approval mattered more than it should. 3 weeks after her arrival, opportunity for closer observation presented itself unexpectedly. Hannah awoke with alarming pains that sent Joseph riding for the doctor in Cottonwood Springs before dawn. "Too early," Hannah whispered, fear evident in her usually composed face as Rachel helped her back to bed. "The baby's not due for months yet." "Everything will be fine," Rachel assured her with more confidence than she felt. "Dr. Wilson will know what to do." By mid-morning, Dr. Wilson had come and gone, leaving strict orders for bed rest and quiet. "Complete stillness for at least 2 weeks," he had instructed gravely. "Any exertion could bring on labor prematurely." "2 weeks?" Hannah protested weakly. "Who'll manage the house? The cooking?" "I will," Rachel had declared without hesitation. "You focus on keeping that baby right where it belongs." Now, as she faced the prospect of preparing lunch for 15 hungry men without Hannah's guidance, doubt crept in. The kitchen suddenly seemed vast and complicated, Hannah's effortless orchestration revealed as the skilled performance it truly was. "Problems, Miss Winters?" Rachel startled at Caleb's voice. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, concern evident in the slight furrow between his brows. "No," she answered reflexively, then reconsidered. "Yes, perhaps. I've never cooked for so many on my own." Caleb stepped fully into the kitchen, his presence somehow making the large room seem smaller. "Hannah manages by preparation and delegation. The men can help, so can I." Rachel blinked in surprise. "You?" A faint smile touched his lips, softening the stern lines of his face. "Contrary to appearance, I'm not entirely useless in a kitchen. Before Hannah and Joseph came, I fed myself and the men for years." "Badly, from what I've heard," Rachel replied without thinking, then clapped a hand over her mouth in mortification. To her astonishment, Caleb laughed, a rich, deep sound that transformed his face completely. "Accurately heard. My biscuits were legendary for their durability. Might have made decent horseshoes." The unexpected humor dispelled Rachel's anxiety. She found herself smiling in return. "Well, Mr. Blackwood, if you're volunteering, I won't refuse capable hands. The stew needs stirring while I start the biscuits." For the next hour, they worked together in a companionable rhythm that surprised Rachel with its ease. Caleb moved with the same quiet efficiency he displayed on horseback, following directions without complaint, anticipating needs before she voiced them. By the time the ranch hands began filing in for the noon meal, a hearty beef stew simmered alongside golden biscuits that bore no resemblance to horseshoes. "You've saved lunch," Rachel acknowledged, as Caleb placed the last platter on the table. "Thank you." He studied her for a moment, his blue eyes intent. "You would have managed. You're more capable than you give yourself credit for, Miss Winters." The simple statement, delivered with such certainty, warmed Rachel more than it should have. Before she could respond, the kitchen filled with hungry men, and the moment passed. Later that evening, after serving supper and checking on a sleeping Hannah, Rachel stepped onto the back porch for a moment of quiet. The summer night enveloped her in cricket song and the distant lowing of cattle. Stars scattered across the vast Colorado sky like diamond dust, more numerous than she'd ever seen in town, where lamplight dimmed their brilliance. Hannah's resting comfortably? Rachel turned to find Caleb approaching from the direction of the bunkhouse, his tall figure silhouetted against the yard's single lantern. "Yes. The tea Dr. Wilson left seems to help with the discomfort." She hesitated, then added, "She's worried about being a burden." Caleb joined her at the porch railing, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Hannah's carried this ranch on her shoulders since the day she arrived. She's entitled to rest when needed." "She speaks highly of you," Rachel ventured, "of how you gave Joseph a chance when others wouldn't." He was silent for a long moment, his profile sharp against the night sky. "Joseph gave himself a chance. I merely provided the opportunity." "As you did for me," Rachel said softly. Caleb turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I recognized a strength in you that Cottonwood Springs was too blind to see." The words hung between them, weighted with something Rachel couldn't quite name. She became acutely aware of her scars, visible even in moonlight, and resisted the urge to turn her damaged side away. "Most would call it foolish optimism to see strength in this," she said, gesturing to her face. "Most would be wrong," he countered simply. "Scars are evidence of survival, Miss Winters, not weakness." Their eyes held across the darkness, and for one suspended moment, Rachel felt truly seen, not as a tragic figure or a damaged woman, but as herself, whole despite everything broken within and without. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the spell. Joseph appeared at the edge of the porch, his expression apologetic. "Boss, Tucker's back from the South Range. Says there's trouble with the boundary markers again." Caleb straightened, the brief vulnerability in his bearing vanishing beneath the mantle of ranch owner and employer. "I'll see to it. Miss Winters, rest well. Tomorrow will be another long day." She watched him stride away, wondering at the strange connection that had briefly flickered between them like heat lightning on a summer horizon, there and gone too quickly to be certain of its existence. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of work, as Rachel shouldered Hannah's duties alongside her own. The rhythm of ranch life revealed itself more fully. The constant minor emergencies that punctuated each day, the small triumphs of perfect timing when meals appeared exactly as hungry men returned from distant pastures, the satisfaction of seeing order emerge from chaos in her growing domain. With Hannah confined to bed, Rachel found herself the unexpected confidant of men who drifted into the kitchen at odd hours, seeking coffee, yes, but also a sympathetic ear for worries about sick horses, feuding bunkmates, or letters from distant sweethearts that needed deciphering. Through these conversations, pieced together with Hannah's bed-bound observations, Rachel began to understand the peculiar sanctuary Caleb had created at Blackwater Ranch. Nearly every man carried some visible or invisible wound. Pete's badly healed leg from a mine collapse, young Matthew's stutter that disappeared only when he sang, Tucker's missing eye concealed beneath a careful sweep of hair. "He finds them," Hannah explained when Rachel remarked on this pattern, "or they find him. Men who've been rejected elsewhere for what others see as flaws. And he gives them purpose," Rachel mused, thinking of her own unexpected rescue. Hannah smiled knowingly. "Caleb believes in usefulness over appearance. Results over reputation. It's made him wealthy, but not popular in certain circles." "In town," Rachel guessed, remembering the dismissive way Thomas Henderson had spoken of "that Blackwood fellow" during her last desperate visit. "Cottonwood Springs has long memories," Hannah confirmed. "And little forgiveness for those who succeed," despite its judgment. The mystery of Caleb Blackwood deepened with each such conversation, each glimpse of the careful world he'd constructed away from town scrutiny. Rachel found her curiosity growing, alongside her admiration for the solitary rancher who commanded respect without demanding it, who built opportunity from others, discards. Her opportunity to learn more came unexpectedly, 2 weeks after Hannah's confinement began. Dr. Wilson pronounced Hannah improved but still in need of careful rest. "Another week at minimum," he advised. "The danger has lessened but not passed." That evening, as Rachel finished the supper dishes, Caleb appeared in the kitchen doorway. "A word, Miss Winters?" She dried her hands, suddenly conscious of her wrinkled apron and loose strands of hair. "Of course. I need to ride to Denver tomorrow. Cattle contracts that can't be delayed." He seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "I'd normally leave Joseph in charge, but with Hannah's condition—" "You need him here," Rachel finished for him, understanding immediately. Caleb nodded. "I'll be gone 3 days. Perhaps 4. The men know their duties, but someone needs to hold authority at the main house." Rachel waited, unsure where this conversation was leading. "I'm asking if you would take on that responsibility," he said finally. "You've proven yourself capable these past weeks. The men respect you." Stunned by this unexpected vote of confidence, Rachel struggled to find words. I'm honored by your trust, Mr. Blackwood, but surely someone more experienced—" "Experience isn't what's needed," he interrupted. "Judgment is, and courage. You've demonstrated both." He stepped closer, his expression earnest. "You've brought order to this house in Hannah's absence. The men come to you already with their minor problems. This would simply formalize what's already happening." Put that way, the request seemed less daunting. "What would be required of me?" "Nothing beyond what you're already doing, except the authority to make decisions in my absence. Any emergencies can wait for my return, or Joseph can handle them." Rachel considered the responsibility being offered, not just tasks to complete, but trust to honor. After months of being seen as helpless and broken, the confidence implicit in Caleb's request felt like rain on parched earth. "I'll do my best," she agreed finally. Relief flickered across his face. "I expected no less." He turned to leave, then paused. "I've left ledgers in my study. You'll need to record supplies used and note any purchases from traveling merchants. Can you manage figures?" "My father insisted all his children learn bookkeeping," Rachel replied, a memory surfacing of evenings spent at the kitchen table while her father patiently explained debits and credits. "I kept our farm accounts before." She didn't finish the sentence, but understanding passed between them. "The study is yours to use then." Caleb hesitated, something unspoken hovering between them. "You've brought something valuable to Blackwater, Miss Winters. Something beyond your considerable skills in the kitchen." Before she could ask what he meant, he was gone, leaving Rachel to wonder at the warmth his words kindled within her, a feeling dangerously close to belonging. Caleb departed before dawn the next morning. Rachel rose early to prepare his traveling provisions and found him already in the kitchen, saddlebags packed, his tall frame outlined against the pale rectangle of the eastern window. "You're up early," he observed, accepting the wrapped bundle of food she offered. "I wanted to wish you safe travels," she replied, surprised by the truth of it. In just weeks, this man had transformed from stranger to— what? Employer, certainly. Benefactor, perhaps. But something else, too. Something unnamed, that made his imminent absence feel significant. 3 days, he reminded her. 4 at most. Joseph knows how to reach me if there's trouble. She nodded, suddenly awkward in the pre-dawn intimacy of the quiet kitchen. "Godspeed, Mr. Blackwood." His eyes held hers for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "Caleb," he said quietly, "when we're not in company, I'd prefer you use my given name." The simple request carried weight beyond its words. "Caleb," Rachel repeated, the name feeling strange and right simultaneously on her tongue. "Safe journey, Caleb." Something like satisfaction crossed his face before he turned away. "Take care of my home, Rachel." The sound of her name and his deep voice followed her throughout that day, a reminder of boundaries crossed and new territory entered. The first 2 days of Caleb's absence passed smoothly. Rachel settled into her temporary authority with surprising comfort, managing minor crises, a dispute over missing tools, a traveling merchant selling suspiciously cheap tobacco, a horse with a worrying cough, with growing confidence. Each evening she retired to Caleb's study to record the day's expenditures in his meticulously kept ledgers. The room revealed aspects of the man she hadn't glimpsed before. Shelves lined with books ranging from practical manuals on animal husbandry to volumes of poetry, maps annotated with careful notes about water sources and grazing quality, a battered wooden box containing what appeared to be letters, their edges worn with frequent handling. Rachel resisted the temptation to pry further, focusing on her assigned task, but the glimpse into Caleb's private world enhanced her growing awareness of the complexity beneath his reserved exterior. On the third afternoon, as storm clouds gathered over the distant mountains, Rachel felt the first stirrings of unease. Caleb had promised to return by evening of the third day unless delayed, and the approaching storm would make travel difficult. "He knows these trails better than any man alive," Joseph reassured her when she voiced her concern. "He'll either make it back before the storm breaks or shelter somewhere safe until it passes." His words brought little comfort as the sky darkened prematurely and the first fat raindrops began to fall. By supper time, the storm had arrived in full force, lightning splitting the sky in jagged bursts, thunder rolling across the canyon like artillery fire. Rachel served the evening meal mechanically, her thoughts with the lone rider who might be caught in this deluge. The men ate quickly and dispersed to the bunkhouse, leaving the main house eerily quiet except for the storm's percussion on the roof. After checking on Hannah, who slept peacefully despite the noise, Rachel found herself drawn to the front window. Rain lashed against the glass in horizontal sheets, visibility reduced to mere yards beyond the porch. No sane traveler would attempt the mountain trails in such conditions, she reasoned. Caleb would surely have sought shelter. Why, then, did worry gnaw at her with such persistence? Unable to settle, Rachel stoked the fire in the main room and arranged a blanket on the sofa nearby. When Caleb returned, he would appreciate warmth and dry clothes. She placed his spare boots near the hearth to warm and laid out towels in preparation. The grandfather clock in the hallway had just struck 10 when Rachel heard it. Beneath the storm's fury, the unmistakable sound of hooves in the yard. She rushed to the door, lantern in hand, and flung it open to see a horse and rider materialize from the darkness like apparitions. "Caleb!" she called, relief flooding her voice. The rider slumped forward dangerously in the saddle. Alarmed, Rachel hurried down the porch steps into the driving rain, heedless of the immediate soaking she received. "Joseph!" she shouted toward the bunkhouse as she reached for the horse's bridle. "Help!" Caleb's face was alarmingly pale in the lantern light, his clothing plastered to his body, hair dripping into eyes that seemed to struggle to focus. "Rachel," he mumbled. "Trouble." Before she could respond, his weight shifted, and he began to slide from the saddle. Rachel dropped the lantern to catch him, staggering under his bulk, but somehow managing to slow his descent to the muddy ground. "What happened?" she gasped, kneeling beside him in the rain, searching for injuries. Her hand came away red when she touched his side. "You're hurt." "Benton," he managed, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Ambush at the North Pass." Joseph appeared with 2 other ranch hands, their expressions shifting from curiosity to alarm as they took in the scene. "He's been shot," Rachel said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Help me get him inside." The men lifted Caleb with careful strength, carrying him into the house as Rachel hurried ahead to prepare. "My room," she directed. "It's closest." They laid him on her bed, his tall frame seeming impossibly vulnerable in unconsciousness. Rachel moved with focused efficiency, cutting away his sodden shirt to reveal a ragged wound in his left side. "Bullet's still in there," Joseph assessed grimly. "Needs a doctor." "In this storm?" Rachel shook her head. The trail to town would be washed out by now. She pressed clean cloths against the wound, stemming the blood flow. "We'll have to manage ourselves until morning." Joseph nodded, respect evident in his gaze. What do you need? Hot water, clean bandages, whiskey if we have it. Rachel's mind raced through everything she knew about treating wounds. And wake Hannah. She may know more about bullet wounds than I do. As Joseph hurried to comply, Rachel turned her full attention to the injured man before her. Caleb's breathing was shallow but steady, his skin clammy with shock and rain. The wound, while serious, had missed vital organs if his continued survival was any indication. "Don't you dare die on me now," she whispered fiercely, pressing harder on the makeshift bandage. "Not when I've just found a place I might belong." His eyelids fluttered at the sound of her voice. "Rachel," he murmured, so softly she almost missed it. "Stay. I'm not going anywhere," she promised, her heart contracting painfully at the vulnerability in his usually confident face. "And neither are you, Caleb Blackwood. You hear me? We're both staying right here." Through the longest night of Rachel's life, she fought for Caleb's survival with every ounce of determination she possessed. Hannah, pale but composed despite her own precarious condition, directed the removal of the bullet, a gruesome process that left Rachel's hands bloody but steady. "Not my first bullet wound," Hannah explained when Rachel expressed surprise at her knowledge. "My father was a doctor. I assisted him often before I married." By dawn, the storm had passed, and Caleb's fever with it. He slept deeply now, his breathing more regular, color gradually returning to his face. Rachel, exhausted beyond measure, refused to leave his side even when Joseph offered to take her place. "I promised to stay," she said simply, and something in her tone prevented further argument. As morning light filtered through the curtains, Rachel studied Caleb's sleeping face. In repose, the stern lines eased, revealing the younger man beneath the hardened exterior. A man who had built an empire from rejection, who gathered broken people and gave them purpose, who had seen value in a scarred woman when the rest of the world saw only damage. A man who, despite his own injury, had fought his way home through storm and pain to warn his people of danger. A man she was falling in love with, Rachel realized with sudden clarity that should have been shocking, but somehow wasn't at all. As if sensing her revelation, Caleb's eyes opened, focusing immediately on her face with an intensity that belied his weakened state. "You're still here," he murmured, his voice rough with pain and something else. "Wonder, perhaps." Rachel smiled, too tired for pretense. "I said I would be." His hand moved weakly across the blanket until his fingers found hers. "Most people break their promises when keeping them becomes difficult." "I'm not most people," she replied, her thumb brushing across his knuckles. And this promise wasn't difficult to keep. Understanding passed between them, wordless but profound. His fingers tightened around hers. "The ranch?" he asked finally. "Safe. The men are on alert. Watches doubled at your foreman's instruction." She hesitated. "Caleb, what happened out there?" Pain flickered across his face. Physical or emotional, she couldn't tell. "Benton and his men. They've been watching the ranch, waiting for me to leave. I surprised them scouting the North Trail on my return." "They meant to attack while you were gone," Rachel guessed. Horror dawning. "All of us, here, unprotected." He nodded grimly. "You would have been especially vulnerable. Benton has a history with women." The implication turned Rachel's blood cold. "How did you escape?" "They're poor shots when surprised," he said, with the ghost of his usual dry humor. "And thunder is faster than their blown-out nags. I lost them in the canyon before the storm hit." His expression sobered. "But they'll be back, Rachel, as soon as they realize I survived. You should return to town until this is settled." "To town?" she echoed, disbelief coloring her voice. "Where no one would hire me. Where Clara Henderson suggested an asylum would be kinder than allowing me to live independently?" Frustration crossed his face. "At least you'd be safe from Benton." "Safe and starving," she countered, "or safe and institutionalized. Neither seems preferable to facing danger among people who value me." Their eyes locked in silent battle of wills. Finally, Caleb's expression softened. "You truly won't leave?" Rachel squeezed his hand gently. You offered me a place where I could be judged by my character rather than my scars. Why would I abandon that at the first sign of trouble? Something shifted in his gaze, surprise giving way to something deeper, more profound. You continue to astonish me, Rachel Winters. Before she could respond, he added quietly, if you're determined to stay, there's something you should know. About Benton. About why he hates me beyond the land dispute. Rachel waited, sensing the significance of whatever he was about to share. The scar you see, Caleb began, his free hand rising to touch the jagged line that divided his face, is the least of what Frank Benton took from me. Caleb's voice grew distant as he began his tale, as though the years fell away and he was once again the young man who had first arrived in these mountains. I came to Colorado with my wife Rebecca in '67. We were barely more than children ourselves. I was 21, she was 19, full of dreams about building a life in the West. Rachel watched his face soften at the mention of his wife, the hardened rancher momentarily replaced by the ghost of that hopeful young man. We had enough saved to buy a small claim north of here. Land no one wanted because it was too rocky for farming, but I knew cattle could thrive there. His fingers tightened around Rachel's. Becca believed in me when no one else did. Said I had the stubbornness to make stones grow grass if I set my mind to it. He paused, drawing a careful breath that wouldn't strain his wounded side. The first year was harder than anything we'd imagined. Winter came early. Game was scarce. But we survived, and by spring, things were looking up. We had our first calf crop, a vegetable garden. Becca was... His voice faltered. She was expecting our first child. Rachel's heart constricted, somehow knowing where this story led even before he continued. Frank Benton was already known as trouble back then. His father owned what is now Blackwater Ranch, but Frank had been wild since boyhood. Ran with a rough crowd from the mining camps. I steered clear of him when possible. Caleb's expression darkened. Until the day he and 3 others rode onto our claim, drunk and looking for entertainment. Rachel squeezed his hand gently, offering silent support to continue what was clearly a painful recounting. I was checking fence lines a mile from the cabin. Didn't hear them arrive. Self-recrimination edged his words. Becca was alone, 6 months along with our child. When I returned, his voice broke and he closed his eyes briefly. When I found her, she'd fought like a wildcat. The cabin was destroyed. She was barely breathing. Caleb, Rachel whispered, tears welling. You don't have to. You need to understand, he insisted, eyes opening with fierce intensity. Benton doesn't just want my land or my cattle. He wants to destroy everything I've built because I took everything from him. You. Rachel couldn't mask her confusion, but he was the one who... I tracked them, Caleb continued, his voice hardening. Followed their trail for 3 days into the mountains. Found them celebrating at an old mining camp. I had my father's rifle and rage like you can't imagine. His expression turned distant again. I killed 2 of them before they knew I was there. The 3rd died trying to run. Benton, I saved for last. Rachel's breath caught at the cold precision in his voice, so at odds with the compassionate man she'd come to know. I meant to kill him slowly, Caleb admitted, his eyes meeting hers unflinchingly. Had it all planned. But in the end, I couldn't become the animal he was. I shot him in the shoulder instead, left him for the law. His hand unconsciously touched the scar, bisecting his face. Not before he marked me, though. Wanted me to remember him every time I looked in a mirror. As if I could ever forget. What happened to Rebecca? Rachel asked softly, though she already feared the answer. She held on long enough for me to return, he said. Grief still raw in his voice despite the passage of years. Long enough to tell me what happened, to make me promise I wouldn't let hatred consume me. Then, she was gone, our child with her. Silence fell between them, weighted with shared understanding of devastating loss. Benton went to territorial prison, Caleb eventually continued. Should have hanged, but his father's money bought leniency, 10 years instead of a rope. I used that time to build this ranch, this sanctuary. Bought the Benton land when the old man drank himself to death, expanded it, made it something that would have made Becca proud. And now he's free, Rachel concluded, understanding at last the tension that had gripped the ranch since her arrival. Seeking revenge for what he sees as your theft. Caleb nodded grimly. He was released 2 years ago, started small, cutting fences, rustling a few head, graduated to burning outlying cabins, attacking isolated ranch hands. This is the first time he's come so close to the main property. Because you were away, Rachel realized, he's been watching, waiting for an opportunity. Yes. Caleb's expression darkened further, and I played into his hands, leaving you all vulnerable. Rachel straightened, indignation flaring. You were conducting necessary business. We are not helpless children to be protected, Caleb Blackwood. Your men are capable. Hannah is formidable despite her condition. And she gestured to her scarred face. I've already survived the worst day of my life. Frank Benton doesn't frighten me. Surprise, then reluctant admiration crossed Caleb's features. Perhaps not. But he should. You haven't seen what he's capable of. Neither have you seen what I'm capable of, she countered. None of us survive fire unchanged, Caleb. The flames that scarred me also forged something stronger. Their eyes held across the small distance, mutual recognition passing between two souls tempered by tragedy. Something shifted in Caleb's gaze, respect deepening into something warmer, more personal. I believe you, he said finally. God help me, but I do. The moment stretched between them, intimate despite the circumstances. Rachel became acutely aware of her hand, still clasped in his, the propriety she'd abandoned in her fear for his life. The fact that he lay in her bed while she sat vigil like a wife rather than an employee. You should rest, she said, reluctantly withdrawing her hand and standing. I'll check on Hannah. Let Joseph know you're improving. Caleb caught her wrist before she could retreat. Rachel. His voice held a question he didn't voice aloud. She paused, suspended between the safety of distance and the danger of acknowledging what was growing between them. We'll speak more when you're stronger, she promised softly. Rest now. His fingers released her, but his eyes followed as she moved to the door. Thank you, he said simply, for staying. The words carried weight beyond their immediate meaning. Gratitude not just for her care during his injury, but for her presence at the ranch. Her refusal to abandon what they were building together, despite new dangers. Always, she replied, and closed the door softly behind her. The ranch transformed over the next 3 days, preparing for the threat they all now understood loomed on the horizon. Under Joseph's direction, men fortified vulnerable structures, established guard rotations, and brought distant cattle closer to the main compound where they could be better protected. Rachel watched these preparations from the kitchen window as she balanced her regular duties with caring for both Hannah and Caleb. The latter proved a far more difficult patient, chafing at confinement when danger threatened his people. You'll reopen that wound and be worse than useless, she scolded when she caught him attempting to rise on the second day. The men know what to do. Joseph has everything well in hand. I should be out there, Caleb protested, even as he allowed her to guide him back against the pillows. They're my responsibility. And you're mine at present, Rachel countered, adjusting his bandages with gentle efficiency. At least until you stop bleeding through these every few hours. Something in her tone must have conveyed her seriousness, for Caleb subsided with only token resistance. You're a formidable nurse, Miss Winters. I had practice, she replied quietly. With my father, before the end. His expression softened. I'm sorry. I forget sometimes that your losses are as fresh as mine are distant. Different. Not greater or lesser, she corrected, her hands stilling on the clean bandage. Fire or violence, the result is the same. People we loved gone. Futures we imagined erased. She glanced up to find Caleb watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Not erased, he said softly. Transformed, like iron in the forge. The simple understanding in his words, the recognition of how tragedy shaped rather than defined them, touched Rachel deeply. Yes, she agreed. Transformed. By the third day, Caleb insisted on moving to his own room, though he remained weaker than he would admit. Rachel helped him make the short journey down the hallway, his weight partially supported against her side. his breathing carefully controlled against the pain. "You make a better crutch than most men twice your size," he observed, as they paused for him to rest. Rachel smiled faintly. "Stubbornness makes up for what I lack in stature." In his own quarters, surrounded by the personal effects that reflected his private self, Caleb seemed both more and less the formidable ranch owner. More because the room revealed his substantial accomplishments, less because it also exposed his human comforts and habits. Books stacked by the bedside. A worn quilt that had clearly been mended many times, a small drawing in a simple frame, a cabin against mountain backdrop rendered with loving detail if limited skill. "Rebecca's," Caleb explained, noticing Rachel's gaze lingering on the drawing. She loved to sketch, said it helped her see beauty even in harsh places. Rachel nodded, understanding perfectly. "My mother preserved flowers, pressed them between Bible pages, said they reminded her that lovely things could endure beyond their season." The shared memory created a bridge between their separate griefs, connecting rather than dividing them. As Caleb settled into his bed, visibly exhausted by even this small exertion, Rachel adjusted pillows to support his injured side. "Joseph wants to speak with you when you're rested. Plans for defending the north boundary." "Send him in an hour," Caleb directed, his mind clearly shifting back to the threat at hand despite his weakness. "And Rachel?" She paused at the door, looking back questioningly. "I meant what I said. About not erased, but transformed." His eyes held hers steadily. "You've helped me remember that." The simple admission warmed her more than it should have. "Rest, Caleb. The transformation isn't complete yet, for either of us." That evening, as clouds gathered again over the distant mountains, Rachel felt a strange restlessness. She'd completed her usual tasks, checked on both Caleb and Hannah, and should have been exhausted. Instead, she found herself drawn to the front porch, watching as lanterns were lit across the ranch yard, casting pools of gold against the deepening twilight. Joseph found her there, his expression troubled. The men spotted smoke signals from the ridgeline, old mining camp signals. Rachel's spine stiffened. "Benton?" He nodded grimly. "Likely calling his scattered gang together. Could be 20 men when all assembled." "Against our 15, Rachel calculated. "Not impossible odds." Joseph gave her an appraising look. "Most women would be packing to flee about now." "I'm not most women," she replied simply. "And there's nowhere safer for me than here, among people who see me clearly." Understanding crossed Joseph's weathered face. "Caleb said you'd say something like that. Said I wasn't to argue with you about staying." "A wise decision on his part," Rachel answered with the ghost of a smile. "How is he?" "Stubborn as a mule with a thorn in its hoof," Joseph replied, fondness evident beneath his exasperation. "Wants to be moved to the study tomorrow so he can oversee preparations from there. Says he can't think straight flat on his back. If his wound doesn't reopen, I suppose it's possible," Rachel conceded reluctantly. "But he's not to leave the house, Joseph. He'd be a target the moment Benton's men spotted him." Joseph nodded agreement. "I've told the men the same. Boss stays inside, no matter how much he bellows." Their shared concern for Caleb created an easy camaraderie that continued, as Joseph outlined the ranch's defensive preparations. Rachel listened attentively, offering suggestions from her unique perspective as someone who had observed the ranch's routines from the heart of the household. "The woodpile by the kitchen door creates a blind spot," she noted. "And the rain barrel at the corner of the bunkhouse would provide cover for anyone approaching from the east." Joseph's eyebrows rose. "You've got a tactical mind, Miss Winters." "I have an observant one," she corrected. "When you're marked as I am, you learn to notice details others miss, including vulnerabilities." By the time they finished their circuit of the main buildings, darkness had fallen completely. The air hung heavy with the promise of rain, and the usual night sounds of the canyon seemed muted, as if nature itself sensed the coming confrontation. "Tomorrow, or the next day," Joseph predicted as they returned to the main house. "Benton won't wait longer than that. He knows Caleb is wounded, knows we're preparing." Rachel nodded. a strange calm settling over her despite the danger. "Then we'll be ready." Inside, she found Caleb awake, sitting propped against pillows with maps spread across the bed covers. He looked up as she entered, his expression alert despite the pallor that bespoke his continued weakness. "Joseph told you about the smoke signals," he stated rather than asked. "Yes." She moved to stand beside the bed, studying the maps he'd been examining. "He's shown me the defensive preparations. They're thorough." Caleb's eyes searched her face. "You're not afraid." "I'm terrified," she corrected quietly. "But fear doesn't rule me, Caleb. Not anymore. The fire taught me that." His hand covered hers where it rested on the edge of the bed. "You continue to astonish me, Rachel Winters." She turned her palm upward, their fingers intertwining with a naturalness that belied the newness of such intimacy between them. "As you do me, Caleb Blackwood." For a moment, they simply existed in the quiet understanding that had grown between them. "Your idea?" she asked Joseph quietly as they settled Caleb in the chair. The foreman nodded. "Knew he wouldn't stay abed once things started moving. Figured we might as well make it as safe as possible." "Good thinking." She squeezed his arm in silent thanks before turning her attention back to Caleb, who was already studying the terrain through field glasses. "They're hanging back just beyond rifle range," he reported. "Waiting for the rest of their group, most likely." "Or for darkness," Joseph suggested. "Night attack would give them advantage, especially if this rain continues." Caleb nodded grimly. "Double the watch at dusk, and move the women to the root cellar if shooting starts." "The women will be wherever they're most needed," Rachel corrected firmly. "Hannah is already in position to cover the east windows. I'll be more useful helping to defend this house than cowering underground." Caleb opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again at the determination in her face. "Can you shoot?" "My father taught all his children," she replied. "I'm better with a rifle than a handgun, but competent with both." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Joseph, make sure Miss Winters has whatever weapons she requires." The day passed in tense anticipation. Ranch hands moved with heightened alertness between their necessary tasks, always in pairs, always armed. Rachel maintained the usual rhythms of meals and household duties, finding strange comfort in these ordinary activities amid extraordinary circumstances. By late afternoon, the watchers had counted at least 15 riders in the distant hills, occasionally visible through breaks in the mist. They made no move to approach, content to maintain their menacing presence just beyond reach. Psychological warfare, Caleb observed from his position by the study window. Benton wants us on edge, exhausted before he makes his move. Rachel brought him coffee and fresh bandages, noting with concern the lines of strain around his eyes. "You should rest while you can," she suggested. "I'll watch for a while." He shook his head stubbornly. "I need to see them coming." "You need to be strong enough to lead when they do come," she countered, kneeling beside his chair to check his wound. The bandage showed a small spot of fresh blood. Not alarming, but evidence of the toll his vigilance was taking. Her fingers worked with gentle efficiency, removing the soiled dressing and applying fresh. Caleb watched her bent head, the careful concentration in her expression as she tended him. "Why did you really stay, Rachel?" he asked suddenly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "After you knew about Benton." "About the danger." Her hands stilled on the clean bandage. She looked up, meeting his searching gaze directly. "Because for the first time since the fire, I found something worth the risk of loss." The simple truth hung between them, more revealing than any declaration of feeling might have been. Caleb's expression softened, the habitual sternness giving way to vulnerable wonder. "And if you lose it?" he asked quietly. "If Benton succeeds in destroying what I've built here?" "Then we'll build again," she answered without hesitation. "That's what survivors do, Caleb. We rebuild from ashes." His hand rose to touch her scarred cheek with infinite gentleness. "Together?" The question contained worlds of meaning, acknowledgement of what had grown between them, hope for a future neither had dared imagine, promise that whatever came, they would face it side by side. "Together," Rachel affirmed, turning her face slightly to press a kiss against his palm, sealing the covenant between them. The moment stretched, suspended in time, a precious island of connection amid the gathering storm. Then a shout from the yard shattered their fragile peace. Riders coming, northeast approach. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Kitchen heat. Rachel paused, realizing with surprise that her dresses had indeed grown less loose around the waist, her constant exhaustion giving way to a steady energy that carried her through long days. "I suppose I have." "It suits you," Hannah said simply before launching into a spirited debate about the merits of sugar versus honey and cornbread that left no room for self-consciousness. These small moments of normalcy accumulated like raindrops filling a parched basin. The elderly ranch hand, Pete, teaching her to identify bird calls during his noon breaks. Joseph's patient explanations of ranch operations when she delivered lunch to the men in distant pastures. Hannah's comfortable chatter about everything from remedies for chilblains to town gossip she'd gleaned from the supply wagon driver. But it was Caleb Blackwood who remained the ranch's enigmatic center, present but somehow apart, watching over his domain with quiet intensity. He took his meals with the men, contributed to discussions of cattle prices and breeding stock, and rode out each day to oversee some aspect of the vast property. Yet Rachel sensed a solitude about him that persisted despite the bustling life of the ranch. She learned to anticipate his preferences. Coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, biscuits with honey rather than jam, steak rare when available. Small details that Hannah confirmed with approving nods when Rachel implemented them without being told. "You're observant," Hannah remarked once, after Rachel had set aside the last portion of blackberry cobbler knowing it was Caleb's favorite, though he'd never said as much. "He notices, you know, even if he doesn't say it." Rachel had brushed off the comment, unwilling to examine why the rancher's approval mattered more than it should. 3 weeks after her arrival, opportunity for closer observation presented itself unexpectedly. Hannah awoke with alarming pains that sent Joseph riding for the doctor in Cottonwood Springs before dawn. "Too early," Hannah whispered, fear evident in her usually composed face as Rachel helped her back to bed. "The baby's not due for months yet." "Everything will be fine," Rachel assured her with more confidence than she felt. "Dr. Wilson will know what to do." By mid-morning, Dr. Wilson had come and gone, leaving strict orders for bed rest and quiet. "Complete stillness for at least 2 weeks," he'd instructed gravely. "Any exertion could bring on labor prematurely." 2 weeks? Hannah protested weakly. "Who'll manage the house? The cooking?" "I will," Rachel had declared without hesitation. "You focus on keeping that baby right where it belongs." Now, as she faced the prospect of preparing lunch for 15 hungry men without Hannah's guidance, doubt crept in. The kitchen suddenly seemed vast and complicated. Hannah's effortless orchestration revealed as the skilled performance it truly was. "Problems, Miss Winters?" Rachel startled at Caleb's voice. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, concern evident in the slight furrow between his brows. "No," she answered reflexively, then reconsidered. "Yes, perhaps. I've never cooked for so many on my own." Caleb stepped fully into the kitchen, his presence somehow making the large room seem smaller. "Hannah manages by preparation and delegation. The men can help, so can I." Rachel blinked in surprise. "You?" A faint smile touched his lips, softening the stern lines of his face. "Contrary to appearance, I'm not entirely useless in a kitchen. Before Hannah and Joseph came, I fed myself and the men for years." "Badly, from what I've heard," Rachel replied without thinking, then clapped a hand over her mouth in mortification. To her astonishment, Caleb laughed, a rich, deep sound that transformed his face completely. "Accurately heard. My biscuits were legendary for their durability. Might have made decent horseshoes." The unexpected humor dispelled Rachel's anxiety. She found herself smiling in return. "Well, Mr. Blackwood, if you're volunteering, I won't refuse capable hands. The stew needs stirring while I start the biscuits." For the next hour, they worked together in a companionable rhythm that surprised Rachel with its ease. Caleb moved with the same quiet efficiency he displayed on horseback, following directions without complaint, anticipating needs before she voiced them. By the time the ranch hands began filing in for the noon meal, a hearty beef stew simmered alongside golden biscuits that bore no resemblance to horseshoes. "You've saved lunch," Rachel acknowledged, as Caleb placed the last platter on the table. Thank you. He studied her for a moment, his blue eyes intent. You would have managed. You're